The sun rose slowly over the red earth of Nato village, spilling golden light across the thatched roofs and waking the world with warmth and music. Women's laughter mingled with the rhythm of pounding pestles, goats bleated near the compounds, and smoke curled lazily from cooking fires. The drums at the edge of the village began to call out the melody of celebration, steady, proud beats that told everyone something special was happening that morning. Along the dusty path, dancers moved like a wave of color, their wrappers shimmering in the sun, their voices carrying songs of joy and teasing. At the heart of it all was Amara, the new bride, her face shy but radiant, her steps graceful and deliberate as she entered the home of her husband for the first time. She was dressed simply, white cloth wrapped around her waist, beaded jewelry glinting softly against her brown skin, her eyes full of nervous hope. The village girls whispered to one another about her beauty and gentle smile. Some said she looked like her late mother, a woman remembered for kindness that healed wounds and brought peace to quarrels. Amara's own heart beat fast with gratitude. She had prayed for a man like Obinna, a man who had promised to protect her, who spoke with calmness and carried the patience of the river itself. Obinna walked beside her now, tall and thoughtful, greeting the elders with steady respect. He was not one for many words, but in his silence lay a quiet strength, or perhaps a weakness yet to be tested. His hand brushed Amara's lightly, reassuring her. But there was a shadow behind his smile, a hesitation in his eyes whenever they met his mother's gaze. Maman Kem stood at the doorway of the family compound, wrapped in deep blue cloth that marked her status. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp like the edge of a cutlass. The villagers bowed slightly when they greeted her. Even the most stubborn men lowered their voices around her. She was a woman who had built her family's name with her will, who believed no one could love her son as much as she did. And now, as she watched Amara being led toward her home, her lips pressed into a thin line. The songs grew louder. "Welcome, daughter. Welcome, wife of Obinna." The women circled Amara, sprinkling white chalk on her arms, blessing her womb, showering her with praise. Children ran alongside, laughing. Drums thundered, and for a moment it seemed the whole village rejoiced. But Maman Kem did not sing. Her eyes, dark and cold, moved from Amara's face to her son's hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. Inside her heart, envy stirred, not the envy of beauty but of affection. 4 years she had ruled the household and every decision passed through her. Now another woman would share Obinna's thoughts, his meals, his care. Maman Kem's pride, hardened over years of control, whispered cruelly to her, "This girl will take him from you." Amara bowed deeply before her, smiling with sincerity. "Mama, I greet you. May I serve you with joy." Maman Kem's reply was slow and cold. "We shall see," she said, her eyes never softening. She gestured toward the yard. "Come in. A home does not know its wife until she sweeps its dust." The laughter of the crowd faded as the newlyweds stepped into the compound. The drums grew distant, the songs echoing off into the hills. Amara felt the warmth of the sun on her back, but a chill of unease in her chest. She looked at her husband, who avoided her eyes. As the last of the dancers left and silence fell upon the compound, Maman Kem stood by the doorway, her arms folded. The wind lifted the edges of her wrapper, carrying dust and dry leaves around her feet. She watched Amara enter her new home and leaned closer to the shadows, her voice barely more than a breath. "Let's see if she lasts in this house," she whispered. The words floated like a curse into the still morning air, marking the beginning of a story that would test love, pride, and destiny. The first light of dawn crept quietly over the compound, brushing the clay walls with pale gold. A rooster crowed somewhere near the goat pen, and Amara stirred from her mat before the rest of the household had even opened their eyes. The air was cool and gentle, carrying the scent of wet soil and palm oil. She rose quietly, wrapping her faded wrapper tightly around her chest, and stepped into the courtyard where the morning dew sparkled faintly on the leaves. Today, she told herself, she would please her new mother. Today she would show that she was not a burden but a blessing. She fetched water from the well before the sun was fully awake, balancing the heavy clay pot on her head with careful grace. As she poured it into the kitchen basin, she caught sight of Maman Kem watching from a distance, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. Amara smiled and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Mama," she said softly. The older woman only nodded and turned away. Amara began to cook breakfast, yam porridge with pepper and crayfish, just the way she thought Maman Kem might like it. The smoke stung her eyes but she didn't mind. She hummed softly as the pot simmered, her heart light with hope. When she set the steaming dish before the family, Obinna smiled approvingly, grateful for the peace he hoped would last. But Mama Nkem barely took a bite before setting her spoon down. "Too much salt," she said flatly. "Do you wish to kill us with your food?" Amara's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I will do better next time." "Next time?" Mama Nkem scoffed, her voice rising. "You think marriage is practice? A woman's worth is shown in her hands. If you cannot cook, what can you do?" Obinna shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped when his mother's sharp eyes flicked toward him. "Eat your food," she snapped. "You are not a child." The rest of the meal passed in silence, broken only by the sound of spoons clinking against bowls. Amara swallowed her tears, forcing a small smile whenever Obinna looked at her. When the dishes were cleared, she returned to her chores, sweeping, washing, grinding pepper. Her back ached, her hands burned from the rough soap, but she continued, whispering small prayers to herself. "Patience, Amara. The heart that endures wins the day." Yet no matter what she did, Mama Nkem's tongue found fault. If Amara swept the compound, Mama Nkem said she stirred too much dust. If she washed the clothes, Mama Nkem said she wasted water. Even when Amara tried to sing softly while working, Mama Nkem hissed, "Do you think this is a festival?" The villagers began to notice. They would see Amara bent over the washing stones or fetching firewood long after sunset. "That woman works too hard," the old women whispered. "And still her mother-in-law finds her wanting." But when Mama Nkem walked by, they fell silent. None dared challenge the matriarch whose words could ruin reputations. One evening, desperate to bridge the distance, Amara brought out a small necklace, a simple piece of beaded coral that had belonged to her late mother. She held it out with trembling hands. "Mama," she said gently, "this belonged to my mother. She wore it for blessings. I wish you would have it. You are the mother I have now." Mama Nkem stared at the beads for a long moment, her lips pressed together. Then, with slow deliberation, she took the necklace and threw it into the fire. The beads cracked in the flames, the red fading into black. Amara froze, her throat tightening. "Mama," she whispered. "Your mother's trinkets mean nothing here," Mama Nkem said coldly. "Keep your charms for your people. In this house, respect is not given, it is earned." Obinna stood helplessly at the doorway, torn between the woman who had raised him and the woman he had chosen. He wanted to speak, but his courage faltered beneath his mother's gaze. That night, Amara lay on her mat, tears soaking her pillow. Outside, the crickets sang and the moonlight spilled through the small window, tracing lines across her face. She pressed her hands together and prayed silently, her voice trembling. Let her heart soften just a little. Let peace live in this house. No answer came, only the distant sound of the drums from another celebration somewhere far away. Amara turned her face to the wall, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." But deep inside, a quiet ache had begun to grow, an ache that would one day bloom into defiance. The rains had come early that season, heavy and relentless, turning the village paths into rivers of red clay. From dawn to dusk, Amara worked without rest, her wrapper soaked and her hands wrinkled from water. She stood by the washing stone in the compound, scrubbing her husband's clothes until her arms burned, while Mama Nkem sat beneath the veranda, shelling groundnuts and watching with narrowed eyes. Every now and then, she would cluck her tongue, muttering loud enough for Amara to hear. "Even when she washes, she dirties the water," she said to no one in particular. "Useless hands. My son could have done better." Amara pretended not to hear. She rinsed the last cloth and spread it carefully over the rope to dry, her back aching as she straightened up. Just then, a group of women passed by the compound on their way to the stream. They waved to her cheerfully, calling out greetings. Amara smiled and waved back, grateful for the brief warmth of kindness. But behind her, Mama Nkem's voice cut through the rain. "When there is work in this house, you have time for gossip?" The women lowered their eyes and hurried away. Amara's smile faded. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said softly. "I was only what? Do you think being polite will fill this house with children?" "Umph." Mama Nkem rose to her feet, her wrapper rustling angrily. 2 years, Amara. 2 full years you have been here and not even a sign from your womb. What kind of woman are you?" The word stung like a slap. Amara lowered her head, shame burning through her. "It is in the hands of the gods," she whispered. Mama Nkem's laughter was bitter. "The gods? The gods help those who please them. Maybe they have turned their faces away from you." Obinna came out from the inner room just in time to hear his mother's voice rise. "Mama, please," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "You speak as if my wife has done wrong. These things take time." Mama Nkem spun toward him. "Time? You defend her even now?" You are blind, my son. That woman has tied your destiny. I warned you, she is not from a family of strength. Her mother was soft, her father weak. Now look, no child, no blessing, nothing. Amara's heart cracked silently inside her chest. She turned away, her hands trembling. Obina's silence cut deeper than his mother's cruelty. He said nothing more. He simply looked away. Later that evening, the family joined the rest of the village for the harvest feast. The drums echoed through the air and laughter filled the square. Women danced, children chased each other, and men boasted of their farms. Amara sat quietly beside her husband, dressed in her cleanest wrapper, trying to hold her smile. She had made the stew for the gathering, pouring her care into every detail. But when Mom and Kem tasted it, she made a show of spitting it out. "Ah, no wonder my son grows thinner every day," she shouted, drawing attention. "This girl's hand has no blessing. Even the salt runs from her pot." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A few of the younger women covered their mouths, hiding their amusement. Obina looked down at his plate, ashamed. Amara sat frozen, her face burning. When she could no longer bear the humiliation, she rose quietly and left the gathering. No one followed. The drums continued, the songs went on, but to her ears they sounded hollow. She walked toward the edge of the village, to the small clearing near the river where the moonlight danced on the water. Kneeling on the damp ground, she looked up at the sky, her eyes wet. "What have I done to deserve this?" she whispered. "I came with love in my hands. Why must they crush me?" A cold wind rustled the tall grass, carrying her voice into the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms together. "If the gods see," she said, "they will remember. One day they will remember." As she rose to her feet, lightning split the sky in two, lighting her figure for a brief moment. A woman alone, drenched and weary, yet unbroken. When she returned home, she found the compound dark and silent. She lay on her mat, her body trembling from the cold, her spirit aching. But deep within her heart, a small ember of strength still glowed. It whispered faintly through her tears, "Endure. For even the clay pot endures the fire before it becomes strong." The morning came with thick mist hanging over the compound, soft and pale like sorrow made visible. The air was heavy, quiet, uneasy. The roosters had crowed long ago, but the usual rhythm of the household was broken. Amara had risen early as always and gone to the market to fetch palm oil and dried fish for the day's meal. When she returned, the smell of smoke met her nose even before she stepped through the gate. Her heart sank. The stew she had left on the fire, meant for her husband's breakfast, had burned to black. She dropped her basket and rushed to the kitchen, fanning the pot desperately with a woven mat. The smoke curled into her eyes, making them sting. "Oh no," she murmured under her breath. She had been gone only a short while, helping a neighbor whose child had fallen ill. Just a moment of kindness, yet it was enough to destroy her peace. Before she could salvage the meal, Mama and Kem's voice rang out across the courtyard like a whip crack. "Amara." Amara froze. She turned slowly, her stomach twisting. Mama and Kem stood at the doorway, her hands on her hips, her eyes blazing. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the smoking pot. I went to help Sister Ngozi," Amara stammered. Her baby was. "Help?" Mama and Kem cut her off, her voice trembling with rage. "Who asked you to play savior when your own home burns? You cannot even feed your husband properly, and you go running to another woman's house." Amara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, Mama. I will cook again." "You will do nothing." Mama and Kem shouted, snatching the pot from the fire and hurling it to the ground. It shattered, sending splashes of burnt stew and ash across the floor. "Look at this mess. You disgrace my son with your foolishness." The noise drew the neighbors' attention. A few women peered through the fence, whispering. Amara felt their eyes burning into her back. She wanted to disappear into the earth. Mama and Kem turned toward the inner room and shouted, "Obina! Come and see your wife's handiwork. Come and see the woman you chose over your mother." Obina appeared at the doorway, his face still drowsy from sleep. He looked from the broken pot to his wife, then to his mother, unsure what to say. "Mama, please," he said quietly, "let's not make a scene." "A scene?" Mama and Kem's laughter was sharp and cruel. "It's already a scene, my son. The whole village knows you married a careless woman who brings shame to our name." Obina rubbed his forehead, avoiding Amara's eyes. "It's just food, Mama. She made a mistake." "A mistake?" Mama and Kem's voice rose higher, trembling with fury. "This is not her first mistake. How many will we forgive? She has no child, no sense, no discipline. Do you want me to die watching her ruin this house? The tension cracked like thunder. Amara stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. Please Mama, I meant no harm. I only... Before she could finish, Mama Nkem raised her hand and struck her across the face. The sound was loud, sharp, final. The world seemed to still. Even the birds stopped their morning song. Amara stumbled backward, one hand on her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Obinna moved as if to intervene, but Mama Nkem's glare froze him where he stood. Send her away, Mama Nkem hissed. Now. Before she destroys what is left of this home. Obinna's voice trembled. Mama, she is my wife. Then choose, Mama Nkem said. Your wife or your mother. You cannot serve two hearts. Amara's breath caught. She looked at her husband, searching his face for the man who had once promised her protection. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence said enough. Mama Nkem turned and grabbed Amara's bundle of clothes, flinging them into the dirt outside the gate. There is your path, she said. Follow it back to the home that birthed you. Amara stood motionless, her chest heaving. The tears she had held back for years now spilled freely. Without a word, she turned, her bare feet stepping into the mud, her dignity her only possession. The sky darkened suddenly as if the heavens themselves mourned her. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, washing over her face, mixing with her tears. Behind her, Mama Nkem stood firm at the gate, watching until the figure of the young woman faded into the mist. Obinna remained rooted to the spot, guilt tearing at his heart, yet he said nothing. He simply turned back inside, leaving the rain to bury his silence. Amara walked on, each step heavy, her heart shattering but her spirit quietly refusing to die. The rain soaked her hair, her wrapper clung to her skin, and the thunder rolled above like a grieving drum. Somewhere deep within her pain, a whisper rose, soft but unyielding. They have cast me out in shame, but the earth itself will remember me. The forest stretched endlessly ahead of her, a green ocean of whispering leaves and the low hum of unseen insects. Amara walked barefoot through the mud, her wrapper torn, her body weak from hunger. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with the scent of wet earth. Each step hurt, yet she moved forward with a strange calm, as though some invisible hand was guiding her. She had left her husband's house with nothing but her name, and even that now felt like a burden. She had no home, no family close enough to take her in, and no strength left to weep. The world had turned its back, but still she walked. Days passed. She slept beneath trees, drank from streams and chewed on wild roots to stay alive. Sometimes she heard voices in the wind, her mother's gentle tone, her husband's silence, her mother-in-law's scorn, all mingling until she could no longer tell which was real. Yet, through her exhaustion, her heart whispered again and again, "Don't break. Don't die where they left you." One afternoon, she stumbled into a small clearing where smoke curled from a distant hut. A woman's voice called out, steady and strong, "Who goes there?" Amara turned, her vision blurred by sunlight. From the shadows emerged an old woman, tall, wrinkled, her eyes bright with wisdom. She carried a wooden staff and wore a wrapper faded from years of use. "My name is Amara," the young woman said, her voice trembling. "I have nowhere to go." The old woman studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then the gods have brought you to the right place. My name is Mama Ojeki. I take in those the world forgets." She led Amara into her hut, small, smoky but warm. The air smelled of herbs and roasted maize. Mama Ojeki gave her water and food, then silently rubbed herbal oil onto her blistered feet. Amara tried to speak, to thank her, but emotion caught in her throat. For the first time in years, someone's touch held no cruelty. In the weeks that followed, Amara began to heal. Mama Ojeki taught her the ways of herbs, how to crush bitter leaves for fever, how to mix bark and roots to calm pain. The old woman spoke often of patience and of balance. "Pain," she said one evening, "is a river. You can drown in it or you can learn to cross it." Amara listened and learned. Her hands, once trembling from fear, now moved with purpose. She began to weave baskets and cloths for the villagers who came to trade with Mama Ojeki. Her kindness drew people in. Travelers, children, and widows all found comfort in her gentle presence. Months turned into years. The once broken bride became known as a healer. She dressed simply but carried herself with quiet dignity. When she laughed, people said it sounded like rain after a drought. Her name began to spread beyond the little village. The wife of the local chief heard of her work and came seeking medicine for her sick child. Amara treated the boy with care and prayer, staying by his mat through the night. By morning his fever broke. The chief's wife embraced her, tears streaming down her face. "You are no ordinary woman," she said. "The gods walk with you." Amara smiled faintly. "I am only what pain has shaped," she replied. In gratitude, the chief's wife gave her land beside the stream and built her a small hut, a place of her own. Amara planted herbs, wove mats, and taught other women how to earn their living. Her home became a refuge for the broken, for the widows, the barren, and the abandoned. She taught them that worth was not measured by marriage or children but by strength and kindness. Sometimes at night she would sit by the river and listen to its gentle murmur. The memories of her past would rise, her husband's silence, her mother-in-law's cruelty, the day she was thrown out. But she no longer felt bitterness. Instead, she whispered softly to the stars, "I was thrown out in shame, but I have found a new name, honor." In that moment, the wind would stir, rustling the trees as if the spirits themselves answered her prayer. She would lift her head high, her eyes bright with quiet pride. Amara had not only survived, she had transformed. The woman who had once begged for acceptance had become the one others sought for wisdom. The woman cast away had become a mother to many. And though she did not know it yet, the path of fate was already turning, for the same voices that once scorned her would soon call her name again, this time with reverence. It was a quiet evening in the village of Umyaba, years after Amara had vanished into the forest. The moon hung like a watchful eye above the huts, and the air was filled with the faint crackle of cooking fires. In the grand compound of Mamankem, laughter had become a stranger. The compound that once echoed with pride and authority now carried only silence. Mamankem's body had grown weaker, her back slightly bent, and her eyes, once fierce, now carried a weight of guilt she refused to name. Obina, her son, sat outside the compound, staring at the fading horizon. His second wife Adoora, the one Mamankem had chosen for him, moved about quietly, avoiding his gaze. Their marriage, though respectable in the eyes of the village, was hollow. No child's laughter filled their courtyard, no songs were sung. The gods had not blessed their union with life. That night, Obina's thoughts drifted back to the woman he had lost. He remembered Amara's laughter, the calm way she spoke, the softness in her eyes. He remembered the day she was thrown out, her tears mixing with the dust, his silence echoing like a curse in his heart. He had done nothing, said nothing. Now each season that passed without a child felt like punishment. "Mother," he said softly, stepping into her hut. The old woman sat by the fire, stirring a pot of soup, her movements slow. "Do you ever think of her?" Mamankem froze, her wooden spoon hovering midair. "Who?" she asked, though the name was already heavy on her tongue. "Amara." The fire crackled. A long silence stretched between them. Finally Mamankem sighed. "What use is thinking of ghosts, my son? She is gone. You have a wife now. A good one." Obina's jaw tightened. "A wife who does not love me. A home that feels cursed. A heart that refuses to forget." Mamankem's eyes flickered toward him. For the first time she saw the pain she had planted bloom before her. "Don't speak like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The gods punish pride, not mothers who protect their sons." He turned to her, his voice rising. "Protect? You destroyed everything I loved." The words echoed through the hut, sharp as a blade. "You turned my home into a prison. You threw her out like a thief and I was too weak to stop you." The old woman's eyes glistened. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. "A mother's fear can make her blind." Obina shook his head. "And now we are both blind, to joy, to peace, to love." He turned and left, his figure swallowed by the night. Days turned to weeks. Rumors began to drift into Umyaba. Whispers of a woman healer who cured the sick, comforted widows, and brought barren women the blessing of children. They said her name was Amara, though no one knew from where she had come. When Obina first heard it, his heart nearly stopped. He left his hut immediately, walking to the market where traders from neighboring villages gathered. "This healer?" he asked. "What does she look like?" The trader, a woman with a basket of yams, smiled. "She is tall, with eyes that calm the heart. She wears simple cloth, but there is grace in her every step. People call her the woman of honor." That night Obina could not sleep. The name, the description, everything pointed to her. The next morning he went to his mother. "I must go," he said. "Go where?" she asked, her voice already trembling with the answer she feared. "To find her. To see if it's true." Mamankem tried to stand, clutching her walking stick. "No, Obina. Leave the past buried. If she is alive, she will curse us for what we did." He met her gaze, steady and cold. "Perhaps we deserve it." The journey was long, but hope pushed him forward. When he reached the neighboring village, the people directed him toward the healer's hut by the river. As he approached, the scent of herbs filled the air. He saw her, kneeling by a sick child, her hands gentle, her eyes calm. Time stopped. Amara lifted her head slowly. Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither spoke. The past hung between them, the betrayal, the years, the silence. Obina's lips parted, his voice breaking. Amara. She stood, her expression unreadable. You look the same, she said softly, though there was no warmth in her tone. He dropped to his knees. I have no right to ask your forgiveness. But I needed to see you to tell you, I never forgot. Amara's gaze softened for a brief moment, then steadied. You don't need my forgiveness, Obina, she said quietly. You need your mother's. From behind them came a voice, frail, trembling, but unmistakable. And what if the mother seeks forgiveness too? They turned. Maman Kem stood at the edge of the path, her stick trembling in her hands. Her face was wet with tears. She had followed him all the way, unable to stay behind. Amara's eyes darkened, but she said nothing. The old woman stepped forward, her voice breaking. My child, I wronged you. Pride blinded me. I thought I was protecting my son, but I was only protecting my own fear. The silence stretched, heavy with emotion. The wind rustled the trees as if listening. Finally, Amara spoke, her tone calm but firm. What we destroy with pride, we must rebuild with humility. I have no hate left, Maman Kem. Only lessons. Then gently she turned and led them both into her hut. Inside the hut, the air was warm and thick with the scent of burning herbs and palm oil. The small fire in the corner flickered, casting moving shadows on the mud walls. Maman Kem sat on a low stool, her hands trembling as she looked around the simple but peaceful space that Amara now called home. It was a far cry from the grand compound she had once ruled over, yet there was something sacred in its stillness. Every corner breathed life, care, and humility. Amara moved quietly, pouring water into a wooden cup. She placed it before her former mother-in-law without a word. The old woman hesitated, her pride warring with shame, then took the cup in both hands and drank. When she lowered it, her eyes glistened. This is the same water I refused you once, she whispered. When you first entered my home. Amara said nothing. Her gaze remained calm, her expression unreadable. But in her heart she remembered how Maman Kem had once made her kneel before the entire household, how she had mocked her for being too simple, too soft. Now that same woman sat before her, frail and humbled by time. Obina stood quietly in the corner, watching the two women. His heart felt heavy with memories, of the day he chose silence over love, of the nights he lay awake hearing Amara's cries echo in his mind. He wanted to speak, but words felt too small for what his soul carried. Maman Kem broke the silence, her voice shaking. Amara, I have lived these years with the weight of what I did. I see your strength now and I see how wrong I was. I mistook kindness for weakness. I mistook pride for wisdom. You had both love and grace and I threw them away. Amara looked at her slowly, the firelight dancing in her eyes. You did what your heart believed was right. The gods do not forget our actions, but they also do not close the door to redemption. I have long forgiven you, Maman Kem, not for you but for my own peace. The old woman covered her face and wept. Her shoulders shook, her pride finally breaking apart like dry clay. Amara knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Let the past stay where it belongs, she said softly. We are not bound by the mistakes we made, but by what we choose to become. Outside, the sound of women singing drifted through the air. The villagers had gathered near the river to celebrate the healer who had saved their children and mended broken homes. They called her the woman of honor, their voices rising like prayer. Obina looked toward the sound, then back at Amara. They speak of you with reverence, he said quietly. You've built something greater than any wealth I could have given you. Amara met his gaze, the years between them melting away, replaced by something softer, steadier. What I built came from pain, she said. But pain, when accepted, becomes power. He stepped closer, his voice low. I came to ask for forgiveness, but I also came to ask if there is still a place for me in your heart. The air grew still. Maman Kem lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes filled with regret and hope all at once. Amara looked at Obina for a long time, then shook her head gently. Forgiveness is easy. Forgetting is not. What we had was buried the day I was cast out. I walk a new path now, not as a wife seeking acceptance, but as a woman who knows her worth. Obina bowed his head, his heart breaking silently, yet somewhere deep inside he understood. Maman Kem reached for Amara's hand again. Then let me stay with you, she said softly. Not as your mother-in-law, but as an old woman who needs to learn from the one she wronged. Amara hesitated, her eyes softening. She thought of the young woman she once was, timid, desperate for approval, and of the strong healer she had become. Slowly she nodded. If you are willing to serve the same way I once served you, with humility and kindness, then my home is open. Mama Nkem bowed her head low, whispering, The gods bless you, my daughter. 4 days that followed, the sight of the proud matriarch working quietly in Amara's hut became a lesson to the villagers. She fetched water, pounded herbs, and cared for the sick alongside Amara. Those who once feared her now spoke of her transformation. People began to say that the healer not only cured bodies but also healed hearts hardened by pride. Obinna visited often, helping where he could, though he never pressed Amara for more. In her strength he found his own peace, a lesson he would carry for life. One afternoon, when the sun bathed the river in gold, Mama Nkem called the villagers together. Standing beside Amara, her voice rang clear. This woman, she said, the one I once threw out in shame, she has returned not with vengeance but with honor. Let every mother remember this. To destroy a woman's spirit is to curse your own blood. To lift her up is to bless generations. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in songs of praise. Drums rolled through the village, voices rising in celebration. Amara stood tall, her white wrapper gleaming in the sunlight, her eyes bright with quiet pride. Mama Nkem knelt before her, a gesture that would be spoken of for years, and placed her wrinkled hands on Amara's feet. Amara, humbled and tearful, lifted her gently to stand. Together they turned to face the river, the wind carrying their forgiveness into the world. And as the sun set that evening, the story of Amara, the bride cast out who returned with honor, became a tale told in every village, reminding all that true strength is born not from pride, but from grace. Years passed, and the story of Amara, the woman of honor, spread far beyond the boundaries of her small village. Traders who passed through spoke of her name with reverence. Chiefs sent messengers to seek her counsel, and barren women journeyed for days to receive her blessings. Her home by the river became a place of gathering, healing, and wisdom. The sound of her laughter blended with the rustling of leaves, and her hut always smelled of herbs and hope. Mama Nkem grew old under her care. The once feared matriarch who had once thrown Amara out now lived humbly, tending to the herb garden, sweeping the compound, and telling every young bride who visited, "Never let pride blind your heart. I once lost everything because I could not see the beauty in another woman's goodness." The villagers grew to love the old woman, but they loved Amara even more, not for her power or her beauty, but for the calmness she brought wherever she went. She had become something more than mortal in their eyes, a symbol of resilience, grace, and the mysterious justice of the gods. One quiet morning, as dawn stretched across the horizon, Amara knelt beside the river where her story had begun. The water shimmered in soft gold, reflecting her calm face. She dipped her hands into it, feeling the cool rush flow through her fingers. This river had once witnessed her tears, her despair, her hunger. Now it carried her peace. Obinna still visited often. His hair was beginning to gray, and though he had found peace within himself, the look in his eyes whenever he saw Amara carried both regret and admiration. He never remarried after Adaora left him to return to her family. She could no longer bear the emptiness of a loveless union. One day as Obinna arrived, he found Amara teaching a group of young women how to mix herbs for fever and childbirth. Her tone was patient, her movements graceful. When she saw him she smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that spoke of the long path they had both walked. "Obinna," she said, rising to her feet, "you still come?" "I do," he answered softly. "Not to seek what I lost, but to honor what you became." She nodded slowly. "Then you have learned." They walked together toward the riverbank. The air smelled of rain and thunder rolled softly in the distance. "Sometimes," he said after a pause, "I wonder what our lives would have been if things had been different." Amara looked toward the horizon. "If things had been different," she said, "I might have remained in your house, small and silent, never knowing the strength I carried. Sometimes pain is the only road to purpose." He bowed his head. "And sometimes love is the lesson pain leaves behind." The two stood in silence for a long while, the wind gently moving through the trees. Mama Nkem watched them from afar, her old eyes filled with peace. She knew the gods had completed what they began. They had humbled her pride, tested Amara's heart, and restored balance where cruelty had once reigned. That evening, the villagers gathered once again by the river. Drums echoed through the dusk as women danced, and the men sang songs of forgiveness and rebirth. At the center stood Amara, her white wrapper glowing in the fading light, her head wrapped in soft blue cloth. The people sang her name, Amara, the woman of honor, until their voices carried into the stars. Mama Nkem, frail but smiling, leaned on her staff and spoke to the crowd. Years ago I threw her out in shame. Today I stand beneath her honor. The gods forgive those who kneel in truth. And I tell you, no woman's worth should ever be measured by what she brings into a man's house, but by what she carries in her spirit. Tears filled many eyes that night. Even the elders bowed their heads as Amara stepped forward and took Mama Nkem's hand, raising it high. Let no woman ever fear the cruelty of another, she said, her voice strong. For even when the world casts you out, the earth will still remember your name if your heart is pure. The crowd erupted in cheers and songs, their voices blending with the rhythm of the drums. The moon rose over the river, silver and bright, and Amara felt its light touch her face. She closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude. In the years that followed, her story became legend. Mothers told it to their daughters on moonlit nights. Elders shared it with travelers by firelight. The tale carried a single truth that lingered in every heart, that honor born from suffering shines brighter than gold, and that forgiveness can rebuild even what pride once destroyed. When Mama Nkem finally passed, she was buried by the river beside Amara's garden, her spirit at peace. The villagers said that on certain nights, when the wind was gentle, they could hear the faint echo of two women's laughter, one old, one young, mingling with the river's song. And as time flowed like water, Amara's name lived on, not as the woman who was thrown out, but as the one who came back with honor, her story woven forever into the spirit of her people. Seasons continued to turn, and the rhythm of life in the village flowed around Amara like the steady song of the river. Children she once helped deliver now ran laughing through the fields, calling her Mama Amara. The women she had trained in healing and craft had built homes of their own, and they often returned to her with gifts, woven baskets, palm oil, yams, tokens of gratitude. Her compound had become more than a healer's hut. It was a sanctuary, a place where people came to learn that dignity could be rebuilt and where broken hearts came to be mended. One cool morning, the sky gray with the promise of rain, Amara sat beneath the large udala tree by her garden, grinding herbs in a calabash bowl. Her movements were slow but certain, her eyes full of the calm that only time and wisdom bring. A group of young girls gathered around her, curious and eager to learn. "Why do you always smile when the sky is dark, Mama Amara?" one of them asked shyly. She chuckled softly. "Because darkness brings the rain, my child. And rain feeds the earth. Never fear what looks heavy, it might just be carrying your blessing." The girls nodded, their eyes wide. She continued, "When I was your age, I thought joy was found only in peace and comfort. But the gods taught me otherwise. Sometimes they break us only to rebuild us stronger. Sometimes they lead us into storms so we may find our way back to the sun." As she spoke, her gaze drifted toward the river. She could almost hear its soft murmur blending with the whisper of her past. Mama Nkem's laughter. Obina's voice. Her own cries on the day she had been cast out. All of it had become part of the same song, a song of survival. By midday, a messenger from a distant kingdom arrived on horseback. He bowed deeply before her and said, "My queen sends greetings. She has heard of the woman of honor whose herbs heal not only the body but the spirit. She asks that you come to her court and teach her women the art of peace and forgiveness." Amara smiled faintly, her eyes shining with quiet wonder. Once she had been thrown out of a house like dust. Now Queen sought her wisdom. She looked up at the messenger and said, "Tell your queen that I will come when the planting season is over. Healing must first tend its roots before it travels." That evening, as she prepared her supper, Obina came to visit again. His hair had turned silver, and his once proud face now carried the gentle weariness of years. He walked with the careful grace of a man who had made peace with his regrets. "Amara," he said softly, sitting near the fire, "it feels strange to see the world bow to you. You have become something greater than anyone could have imagined." She smiled, stirring the pot of yam porridge. "I became what pain demanded," she said. "But it was not to make the world bow, it was to make my heart stand tall." Obina nodded slowly. "You've taught me more in your silence than I learned in all my years of pride." He hesitated before adding, "When I die, I want to be buried by the river, near Mama, near you. If the gods allow it." Amara looked into the fire. "The river keeps all who have learned its lesson," she said quietly. "It remembers every tear and every prayer. If the gods will it, we shall all rest by its side." That night a soft rain fell. The villagers said the gods were blessing the land again. Amara stood at her doorway, letting the cool drops touch her face. In the distance, lightning flashed over the forest where she had once wandered lost and broken. She whispered a prayer of thanks for the woman she had been, and for the one she had become. The next morning children came running to her hut, laughing. They carried flowers they had picked by the stream. "Mama Amara," they shouted joyfully, "the river is singing again." She followed them to the riverbank. The water sparkled under the morning sun, rippling in golden waves. A soft wind brushed against her skin, carrying whispers of voices long gone, her mother's, Mama Nkem's, and others she had helped find peace. She knelt by the water, smiling. "It sings because peace lives here now," she murmured. Years later, when her own time came, it was said that she passed quietly in her sleep, her face serene, her hands folded over her heart. The villagers buried her by the river, beside Mama Nkem, under the udala tree that shaded her garden. People from distant lands came to pay their respects. Chiefs, traders, mothers and children, all carrying stories of how she had touched their lives. And even after her passing, the legend of Amara only grew. Her story became a song sung at weddings, a lesson whispered to brides, a tale told around fires when the moon rose full. The elders would begin with the same words each time. "There was once a woman cast out in shame, but she returned with honor greater than any crown." And as the story unfolded, children would listen wide-eyed, hearts swelling with awe, learning that grace, forgiveness and strength were the truest forms of beauty. The river still flows beside her grave, murmuring her name through the reeds. Some say that on quiet nights, when the moonlight touches the water just right, a faint figure can be seen walking by the bank, a woman in white, serene and radiant, watching over her people. And they know, it is Amara still guiding them, still whispering through the wind. No cruelty lasts forever. No shame is final. When you walk with truth, you will always return with honor. Generations passed, and the story of Amara, the woman once thrown out but who returned with honor, became more than memory. It became the soul of the village itself. Her home by the river had long since faded into earth and vines, yet the land where it once stood was now sacred. Every year, when the rains came and the fields turned green again, the villagers gathered by that riverbank to tell her story anew. Children, dressed in bright cloths, would sit cross-legged on the grass as elders recited the tale with rhythm and reverence. The oldest among them would always begin the same way. Long ago, a bride entered her husband's house with a heart pure as water. She was mocked, cast out, and forgotten. But the gods are never blind. They lifted her from the dust and made her name eternal, Amara, the woman of honor. Drums would echo softly in the background as women sang songs of strength, their voices weaving through the air like prayer. The story no longer belonged to Amara alone. It had become the heartbeat of every woman who had ever suffered and risen again, every man who had learned to bow before truth, and every mother who had repented for the cruelty born of pride. By the river, a monument stood, a simple stone carved with symbols of the sun, water, and hands joined together. The villagers said that if one placed their palm upon it and closed their eyes, they could feel warmth, the spirit of Amara still blessing those who came with humble hearts. Travelers who passed through always stopped to pay respects, leaving cowrie shells, flowers, or small pieces of cloth as offerings. One such traveler, a young woman named Nena, came one season when the rains were late, and her village suffered drought. She knelt before the stone, tears streaming down her face. "Mother of honor," she whispered, "they call me barren and cursed. Help me find strength." The wind stirred, gentle and soft. The river rippled though no stone had fallen. Nena felt a peace settle over her chest, a voice inside her heart whispering, "What they call a curse, the gods may yet call a gift. Rise, my daughter." She returned home with renewed courage, and seasons later, she bore a daughter. She named the child Amara, in honor of the woman whose spirit had lifted her despair. Thus, the name lived on, passed from mother to daughter, generation after generation, until nearly every family in the region had one girl named Amara, a symbol of strength and endurance. In time, the villagers began to celebrate an annual festival called the Day of Honor. Women would dress in white, carrying palm leaves and calabashes filled with water, walking together to the river where the first Amara had once found her peace. There they would sing, dance, and pour libations into the water, thanking the gods for teaching them that no humiliation lasts forever, and that dignity, once reclaimed, can never be taken again. On the 100th anniversary of her passing, the chief's griot, an old storyteller with a deep, booming voice, stood before a crowd of hundreds. "Listen well," he said, his eyes shining in the firelight. "The gods test us with cruelty, but they gift us with mercy. When you suffer, do not curse the heavens. Remember Amara, the one who turned pain into healing, rejection into wisdom, and shame into glory. She taught us that forgiveness does not make you weak, it makes you eternal. As he spoke, thunder rumbled softly in the distance. The villagers looked up, smiling, for they believed it was Amara's spirit answering their celebration. The rain began to fall, slow at first, then strong, soaking everyone in warmth and laughter. The children danced barefoot in the mud, and the elders lifted their faces to the sky, crying, "She blesses us again." By the firelight, a little girl, another Amara no more than 8 years old, tugged at her grandmother's wrapper and asked, "Grandmother, did she really forgive the woman who hurt her?" The old woman smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yes, child. She forgave her not because she forgot the pain, but because she refused to let it own her. That is what makes her greater than any queen who ever lived." The girl stared at the dancing flames, thinking deeply. "Then when I grow up, I will forgive too," she said. The grandmother kissed her forehead. "Then you will carry her spirit in your heart." As night deepened and the celebration wound down, the villagers left offerings by the river, oil lamps, flowers, carved figures, their lights flickering on the surface of the water. From afar, it looked as though the river itself glowed. The wind carried the scent of rain and earth, and if one listened closely, it almost sounded like laughter, gentle, distant, and full of peace. In that moment, under the silver moon, the legend of Amara was not just a story. It was a living truth, that no cruelty can erase a woman who stands in her truth, that no shame can silence the heart that walks with honor. The griot's final words echoed softly over the water as he closed the tale for the night. And so, when the world throws you out in disgrace, walk with courage. For if your spirit is pure, you will return, not with anger but with honor. And the drums began again, low and slow, as the people sang into the night, their voices rising into the sky, carrying the name Amara across the wind, across generations, across time itself.